The laughter from my 70th birthday party still echoed faintly in the living room, the scent of vanilla cake and roses lingering in the air, but the atmosphere between me and my children had grown thick, heavy enough to suffocate. For 40 years, a secret had lived under my tongue, a truth I was about to finally set free, knowing it could either mend us or shatter us completely. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at them, John, my eldest, ever so serious, Emily, my gentle middle child, her eyes so like her father's, and Lisa, my youngest, always so direct, so fiery. They were my life, my world. "There is something I have needed to tell you all for a very long time," I began, my voice steadier than I felt inside. I took a shaky breath. "One of you is adopted." The silence that followed was absolute, a fragile thing that seemed to stretch for an eternity before it splintered into 1,000 unspoken questions. I held their gazes, my own pleading for understanding, for the love I had always believed was the bedrock of our family. This was not how I had envisioned this moment, not with this tremor of fear in my soul. I had rehearsed it countless times in my mind, always picturing acceptance, perhaps surprise, but ultimately, love prevailing. The reality felt far more precarious. If you are listening to this story, thank you so much for being here. Let us know where you are joining us from in the world, and do not forget to subscribe to become part of our growing community. Our home, the one Robert and I had bought nearly 50 years ago, was filled with the ghosts of their childhoods. Scratches on the doorframe in the kitchen marked their heights, faint crayon drawings still visible on the underside of the old oak dining table if you knew where to look. Every corner held a memory. John's science fair projects spread across the floor, Emily's quiet hours reading in the sunlit window seat, Lisa's dramatic teenage declarations echoing from her bedroom. I had poured my life into this house, into these children. Robert, bless his soul, had been my partner in everything. We had wanted a large family, and when nature proved slower than our desires after John, we had looked into adoption. Then, almost as if fate had a sense of humor, Lisa had come along shortly after we began the process for Emily. We never saw it as one being less ours than the others. They were simply our children. My love for them was a vast, indivisible ocean. I had feared in their younger years that knowing about an adoption might make one feel different, singled out, or that the others might, even unconsciously, treat their adopted sibling with less regard. Robert and I decided together to keep it our secret, to nurture them all under the same umbrella of unwavering love and belonging. "Blood," Robert used to say, his arm warm around my shoulders as we watched them play in the yard, "makes you related. Love makes you family." How I clung to those words now. My deepest desire was for them to remain united, to cherish each other as they always had. My underlying fear, a small, cold knot I had tried to ignore for years, was that the world's harsher views on lineage, on material inheritance, might one day seep in and poison the well of affection I had so carefully tended. The festive balloons from the party still bobbed gently against the ceiling, their cheerful colors a mocking contrast to the strained expressions now settling on my children's faces. John, always the pragmatist, looked more confused than anything, his brow furrowed. Lisa's eyes, however, darted between her siblings, a strange, assessing glint appearing in their depths. Emily, my sweet Emily, just looked at me, her expression open, waiting, a little anxious but trusting. I focused on her, willing my love to wrap around her like a protective shawl. "Emily, my dear," I said, my voice softer now, almost a whisper. "It is you. You are adopted." Emily's face, always so expressive, seemed to crumple. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale, vulnerable. Her beautiful hazel eyes, the ones I had gazed into with such love since she was a babe in arms, welled with tears. She did not speak, just stared, first at me, then at John, then at Lisa, as if seeing them and herself for the first time through a distorted lens. John's initial confusion hardened into something else, something I could not quite name, but that sent a chill down my spine. He exchanged a quick, unreadable glance with Lisa. It was Lisa who broke the stunned silence. A small, sharp gasp escaped her, followed by a look that was not surprise, but something akin to validation? Adopted? She repeated, her voice rising slightly, an edge of steel creeping in. So she is not really our sister? The emphasis on really was like a physical blow. Before Emily could even begin to absorb the shock, before I could offer the reassurances that were crowding my throat, John spoke, his tone measured, but cold. Mother, this is a lot to take in. It changes things, significantly. Lisa, emboldened by his lead, pounced. The will, she said, her voice sharp and decisive. You will need to adjust it, Mother. Emily, well, she is not blood. It would not be fair for her to inherit equally with John and me. It just would not be right. John nodded, his expression grimly serious. Lisa is right, Mom. It is a shock, yes, but we need to be practical now. Family assets, what Dad and you worked so hard for, should stay within the actual family, the bloodline. A wave of icy dread washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. I stared at them, at my son and my youngest daughter, and for a terrifying moment, I did not recognize the people standing before me. Disbelief warred with a pain so acute, it felt like my heart was being squeezed in a vice. Their immediate, almost reflexive leap to the subject of inheritance, their callous disregard for Emily's shattered emotions, the cruel, casual dismissal of a lifetime of shared experiences, of a bond I had believed was unbreakable. It was a betrayal of everything Robert and I had stood for, everything I had tried to instill in them. This was so much worse than my deepest fears had ever conjured. The air in the room, once filled with the warmth of celebration, now crackled with a chilling avarice. Emily finally made a small, wounded sound, like a startled fawn, and covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with hurt and disbelief. My own eyes burned, but I would not let them see my tears. Not yet. Though I was reeling internally, a lifetime of practiced composure came to my aid. I looked at John, then at Lisa, my voice low and trembling not with weakness, but with a profound, burgeoning anger and an even deeper sorrow. The only thing that has changed today, I said, each word carefully enunciated, is that a truth, long held, has been spoken. My love for Emily and her place in this family has not changed, not one bit. And I will not discuss my will or any financial matters under these circumstances, especially not when one of you is clearly in so much pain. I glanced pointedly at Emily, who was now openly weeping, her shoulders shaking. John and Lisa had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable, but the hardness in their eyes did not yield. Internally, something shifted within me. A cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in the wreckage of my shattered hopes. I remembered with sudden clarity the discussions Robert and I had had with Mr. Thompson, our lawyer, years ago. We had been updating our wills after Robert's first minor health scare. We had talked about wanting to ensure fairness, always, but also about protecting our legacy from any unforeseen disputes. A particular clause came to mind, one born from a general desire to ensure our children always treated each other with respect, now seeming almost prophetic, a potential instrument of a justice I had never imagined needing to invoke against my own. I realized then that this was not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a painful chapter. I would let them show their true colors. The battle for the soul of my family, it seemed, had just begun. Their faces were masks of greed and entitlement, a stark contrast to Emily's quiet devastation. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, not for the secret revealed, but for the ugliness it had unearthed in my own children. What would you do if your own flesh and blood valued money over love, kinship over kindness? Whose side would you be on then? The days that followed my 70th birthday were some of the longest and most painful of my life. The festive decorations were taken down, the leftover cake discarded, but the chill in our family relationships lingered, growing colder with each passing hour. John and Lisa, after their initial shock and brazen demands, began what I can only describe as a systematic campaign of pressure. It started with phone calls. John, his voice an unnerving blend of strained patience and underlying insistence, would say things like, "Mom, I have been thinking. We need to be sensible about this. Dad would have wanted his legacy to go to his direct descendants. It is just the natural way of things." Lisa was less diplomatic. "Mother, you have to see this from our perspective. We are your real children. Emily has had a wonderful life with us, thanks to you and Dad. Surely that is enough for her. She should understand. If she does not, well, that just shows her true colors, does it not?" Their arguments, repeated in various forms through text messages and unwelcome, tense visits, all hammered the same nail. Emily was an outsider, and her share of any inheritance should be drastically reduced, if not eliminated entirely. "It is about preserving what Dad worked for his actual lineage," John would insist, as if Emily's 40 years as Robert's beloved daughter meant nothing. "We have our own families to think about, Mother," Lisa would plead, her voice laced with a false concern that made my stomach turn. "Our children, your biological grandchildren, deserve to benefit from their grandparents' hard work." Each word was a fresh stab to my already wounded heart. I listened, mostly in silence, offering no commitments, no arguments, simply stating that I needed time to think. They seemed to interpret my quiet sorrow as weakness, as a sign that I was perhaps wavering, that their relentless pressure might eventually yield the results they so craved. Emily, my dear Emily, was a portrait of quiet suffering. The twin revelations of her adoption and her siblings' cruel rejection had left her adrift in a sea of confusion and pain. She withdrew into herself, her usual sunny disposition clouded by a deep sadness. Yet, through it all, her kindness towards me never wavered. She called daily, just to check in, her voice soft and concerned. She brought me small bouquets of flowers from her garden, never once mentioning the inheritance, never once complaining about John or Lisa. Her quiet dignity was a stark contrast to their grasping demands. It was clear where the true battle lines were drawn. It was my lifelong belief in love and fairness. The values Robert and I had cherished, pitted against John and Lisa's sudden, ugly avarice and their deeply discriminatory views. The conflict was not merely about money. It was about the very definition of family, of belonging, of what it truly meant to be a child of my heart. The pressure from John and Lisa escalated. They began to subtly, and then not so subtly, poison the well with other relatives. I heard whispers, echoes of their campaign, from my sister, who called me, flustered, after a conversation with Lisa. "Martha, dear," she had said, her voice hesitant. "Lisa seemed quite upset about Well, about Emily. She mentioned something about fairness and the will. I am sure it is just a misunderstanding. I reassured her as best I could, but the insidiousness of their actions made me feel sick. They were attempting to isolate me, to paint Emily as some sort of interloper, a cuckoo in the nest, who had always been unfairly favored and was now trying to usurp what was rightfully theirs. One evening, Lisa called, her voice sharp and brittle. "You always did favor her, Mother," she accused, the resentment in her tone palpable. "We all saw it, John and I. We just never understood why. Now it all makes sense. You pitied her because she was not really yours, but pity does not make her family, not in the way that counts. And it certainly does not entitle her to an equal share of what our father, our real father, built." That accusation, that twisting of my love into pity, cut deeper than almost anything else. I ended the call, my hand trembling as I replaced the receiver. My home, once a sanctuary of warmth and laughter, began to feel like a besieged fortress. It was then that I started to document everything. I kept a small notebook, and after each conversation, each hurtful text message, each manipulative visit, I would write down what was said, the date, the time. I did it almost clinically, a strange detachment settling over me, a necessary shield against the emotional onslaught. This was not the behavior of the children I had raised, the children I loved. Or perhaps, I thought with a pang of despair, it was, and I had simply been blind to this grasping, selfish core within them. Feeling the immense weight of their relentless campaign, knowing I needed to stand firm, but also needing reassurance that my long-laid plans were truly unshakable, I made an appointment to see Mr. Thompson, our family lawyer for over 40 years. He was a man of quiet dignity, a contemporary of Robert's, and someone who knew our family history, our values, intimately. His office, with its scent of old books and lemon polish, had always been a place of calm reason. I sat across the large mahogany desk from him, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room, and recounted the events since my birthday party. The pain was evident in my voice, a rawness that I could not entirely conceal. "They have become strangers to me, Mr. Thompson," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Strangers motivated by nothing I taught them, nothing Robert and I ever stood for." Mr. Thompson listened patiently, his expression kind but serious, his fingertips steepled. He did not interrupt until I had poured out the whole sorry tale. When I finished, there was a long silence, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Martha," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I am deeply sorry you are going through this, but I must reassure you. The will, as it was drafted and signed by you and Robert all those years ago, is robust. And the specific clause we discussed at length, the one addressing fairness and conduct between beneficiaries, it is very clear and legally sound." He paused, then a rare, faint smile touched his lips. "Robert was quite insistent on that part, you know. He said to me, 'Family is built by love, Thompson, not just by who shares your name on a birth certificate, and our legacy must reflect that. It must protect itself from any kind of internal strife rooted in pettiness or prejudice.'" Hearing Robert's words, even relayed through Mr. Thompson, was like a balm to my wounded spirit. A surge of bittersweet strength flowed through me. The memory of my beloved husband, his unwavering integrity, his boundless love for all three of our children, especially Emily, whom he had adored from the moment we brought her home, it anchored me, steadied me against the storm of John and Lisa's making. "Robert would be so profoundly disappointed in John and Lisa," I said softly, tears finally pricking my eyes. He would be heartbroken, but he would also want me to do what is right, what is just. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. Indeed, he would. The will, Martha, is designed to uphold your and Robert's deeply held values. It will do its job, if and when the time comes for it to be read in its entirety. For now, you must protect your own peace of mind as best you can. His words were a comfort, a reassurance of the legal strength of my position. But they were also a stark reminder of the painful path that might still lie ahead. The will was a shield for Emily, yes, and a testament to Robert's and my beliefs. But it was also a mirror, one that would eventually force John and Lisa to confront their own reflections. I left his office feeling a renewed, albeit somber, sense of purpose. Would they ever recognize the ugliness staring back at them from that mirror, or were they too blinded by their own greed? A few weeks later, John and Lisa, clearly frustrated by my continued silence and what they perceived as my inaction on the will, escalated their efforts. They called and demanded a formal family meeting. "We need to sort this out, Mother, once and for all," John had said, his voice tight with impatience. "This uncertainty is not good for anyone." Lisa had added, "We are coming over on Saturday. We need to have a serious discussion, and Emily needs to be there too." I agreed, a sense of weary inevitability settling over me. I insisted Emily be present, not to be ambushed, but because I wanted her to witness firsthand the extent of her siblings' intentions and my response to them. They arrived on Saturday afternoon, not with contrition, but with an air of grim determination. John carried a briefcase, from which he produced a typed document. My blood ran cold as he laid it on the coffee table. "Mother, Lisa and I have talked extensively," he began, his tone businesslike. "We believe we have come up with a fair solution, something that respects everyone." He slid the document towards me. It was, as I had dreaded, a crudely drafted family agreement. My eyes scanned the lines. It stated that Emily, in recognition of her unique circumstances and in the interest of family harmony, voluntarily relinquished any claim to a significant portion of my estate. The remaining smaller portion, designated for her, would be held in trust, to be managed by John and Lisa. They actually expected her to sign away her birthright, her rightful place as my daughter, and then entrust her diminished share to their care. Lisa, her expression a mixture of self-righteousness and anxiety, looked at Emily. "This is the only way, Mother, to keep this family from falling apart," she said, her voice falsely gentle. "Emily, if you truly care about Mom's peace of mind, if you care about any of us, you will sign this. It is for the best." John added, his gaze steely, "It just keeps things clean, straightforward." The implication hung heavy in the air. Emily was the unclean element, the complication that needed to be tidied away. Emily looked from the document to John, then to Lisa, her face a mask of stunned disbelief and profound hurt. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I watched my two biological children, their faces set, their eyes hard, and something inside me snapped. The years of love, of sacrifice, of carefully nurtured family bonds felt as if they were turning to ash. I reached for the document, my hand surprisingly steady. I looked directly at John, then at Lisa. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud, but it was filled with an icy calm that surprised even myself. "There will be no signing of any such document," I stated, each word a chip of ice. "My will stands as it is written and as it has been written for many years. Emily is my daughter. She has always been my daughter, and she will always be treated as such. If you two cannot accept that fundamental truth, then it is you who are choosing to damage this family, not Emily, and certainly not me. And with that, I slowly, deliberately, tore their family agreement in half, then in quarters, and let the pieces fall onto the polished surface of the coffee table. John's face flushed a dark red. Lisa gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief, then narrowing in fury. Emily, who had been staring at the offensive document with tears silently tracking down her cheeks, looked up at me, a flicker of something, gratitude, surprise, perhaps even a dawning strength in her eyes. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ragged breathing of John and Lisa. Then John found his voice, sputtering, You cannot be serious, Mother. This is completely unreasonable. Lisa, recovering quickly, jumped to her feet. You are choosing her over us, your real children, after everything. Fine. You will regret this, Mother. You will see. They stormed out of the house, slamming the front door so hard that a small picture frame on the hallway table rattled and fell, the glass shattering. The sound seemed to echo the shattering of our family. The tearing of their ridiculous document was, as Lisa had dramatically declared, a line crossed. For John and Lisa, it was a declaration of war. In the weeks that followed, their campaign of pressure transformed into one of emotional blackmail and cruel isolation. The phone calls, which had been insistent, now became infrequent, then stopped altogether. My attempts to reach out were met with curt, dismissive responses, or, more often, went straight to voicemail. Visits ceased completely. But the most painful blow was their decision to weaponize my grandchildren. They instructed their children, my beloved grandchildren, Thomas and Sarah from John, and little Lily from Lisa, not to visit me, not to call. Excuses were made. Grandma is not feeling well, or Grandma is very busy and needs her rest, or, as I later found out, more insidious whispers about Grandma being unfair and difficult. This tactic cut me to the core. The silence from their homes, the absence of the children's laughter and innocent chatter in my house, became a constant, throbbing ache. Birthdays of grandchildren were missed. School plays and soccer games went unacknowledged by my presence because I was simply not invited, not informed. Emily witnessed my pain, my growing sense of isolation, and I could see the immense guilt she felt, as if she were somehow responsible for this deep rift. One afternoon, as we sat quietly in the garden, she turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Mother," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "maybe I should just tell them. Tell them I do not want anything from the will. I just want us to be a family again. I cannot bear to see you like this." I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it firmly. "No, Emily," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Absolutely not. This is not about you wanting anything or not wanting anything. This is about what is right, what is just. And they are the ones tearing this family apart with their greed and their prejudice, not you. You will not capitulate to their cruelty. Neither will I." The pressure, however, continued to mount. Lisa, I heard through the grapevine of distant family, began spreading more direct rumors that I was becoming mentally unfit, easily confused, and perhaps being unduly influenced by Emily. She even suggested to a cousin that they might need to look into my affairs for my own protection, she had claimed. John, ever the more cautious one, took a different, more insidious route. He consulted a new lawyer, someone unknown to our family, to inquire about the possibility of contesting a will on the grounds of undue influence if a testator was perceived to be favoring an adopted child over biological children, especially if there were questions about the testator's current mental capacity. He was advised, I later learned, that it was a very difficult and costly path, especially if the testator was demonstrably of sound mind and the will had been in place for a long time. But the fact that he was even exploring such avenues showed the depth of his resolve to get what he felt he was owed. Weeks bled into months. The silence from John's and Lisa's homes was a heavy shroud over my days. I tried to keep busy, tending my roses, reading, spending time with Emily when she could visit. But the absence of my grandchildren was a constant, raw wound. One sunny afternoon, I was kneeling by my flower beds, trying to find solace in the familiar rhythm of weeding, when my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind woman of similar age with a gentle smile, came over to the fence. We often chatted over the low hedge that separated our gardens. "Martha, dear," she began, a little hesitancy in her voice, "I hope you do not mind me saying, but I saw Lisa earlier. She was dropping young Sarah off at the Petersons' house down the street for a play date. I almost asked little Sarah why she has not been over to see you lately. You two were always so close. But then I thought perhaps I should not pry." My heart sank. So Lisa was in the neighborhood, yet she made no effort to stop by, no effort to let Sarah see me. The deliberateness of the exclusion was a fresh twist of the knife. I found myself confiding in Mrs. Gable, not the full, complicated details of the adoption and the inheritance, but about the painful, unexplained rift with John and Lisa, and how I missed my grandchildren terribly. Mrs. Gable, a grandmother herself, many times over, listened with deep empathy, her kindly eyes full of understanding. "Oh, Martha," she said, shaking her head sadly. "Children can be a trial, can they not? Even when they are grown, they get ideas in their heads. But love, true love, often finds a way. And sometimes, my dear, they need to learn very hard lessons, lessons that only life or their own mistakes can teach them." Her words, simple as they were, offered a sliver of comfort. A few days later, a small miracle occurred, orchestrated by Mrs. Gable's quiet kindness. I was sitting on my front porch swing, trying to read, when I saw her walking up my path with her own granddaughter, a cheerful girl of about 7. "Martha," Mrs. Gable called out, "Lily just drew the prettiest picture of your roses, and she insisted on bringing it over to you right away." The little girl proudly presented me with a crayon drawing of vibrant red and yellow flowers. As I was admiring it, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. It was Sarah, Lisa's daughter. She had evidently been playing at Mrs. Gable's house and had followed them over, curious. For a moment, Sarah froze, her eyes wide, as if remembering her mother's instructions. Then, in a rush, the impulsiveness of childhood overriding any parental edict, she ran towards me, threw her arms around my neck in a quick, fierce hug, and whispered, "I miss you, Grandma." Before darting back towards Mrs. Gable's yard, a guilty look on her face. That fleeting hug that whispered, "I miss you," was like a tiny, brilliant spark in the overwhelming darkness. It told me that the children's love was still there, untainted, buried beneath their parents' bitterness and manipulation. But it also solidified a painful, ugly truth. John and Lisa were willing to use their own innocent children as pawns, as weapons in their campaign against me. How much more would they make me and those poor children endure before this terrible chapter reached its inevitable, painful reckoning? The thought chilled me to the bone. Not long after that small, bittersweet encounter with Sarah, my body decided it had had enough of the sustained emotional stress. I came down with a severe bout of influenza that laid me low, confining me to bed with a high fever and an aching weakness that seeped into my very bones. Emily, bless her devoted heart, immediately put her own life on hold and moved in temporarily to care for me. She was a ministering angel, coaxing broth and tea past my lips, ensuring I took my medication, changing my linens and sitting quietly by my bedside, reading or simply keeping me company. In my weakened, feverish state, feeling particularly vulnerable and alone despite Emily's presence, I asked her to call John and Lisa. I just wanted them to know I was quite ill. Perhaps, I foolishly hoped, a mother's illness might soften their hearts, might remind them of our shared history, of familial duty, if not love. Emily made the calls. John's response, as she relayed it to me, was brief, almost perfunctory. "Oh, that is too bad. Mom is sick?" he had apparently said. "Well, make sure Emily is taking good care of her. Let me know if you need anything specific from the store or something." He did not offer to visit. He did not ask if he could speak to me. Lisa was even more chillingly detached. "Get well soon, Mother," was her reported message. "Call us if it turns into a real emergency." Neither of them came. Not for a quick visit. Not for a moment to check if their mother, who had nursed them through countless childhood illnesses, was truly all right. There were no flowers, no cards, not even a follow-up call to Emily to inquire about my progress. The stark, brutal contrast between Emily's selfless, round-the-clock care and my biological children's profound indifference was a crushing blow. I lay there in bed, the fever making me muddle-headed, my body aching, but my heart aching more. I felt like a complete and utter failure as a mother to John and Lisa. Had all my years of love, of sacrifice, of putting their needs before my own, meant absolutely nothing to them beyond a potential inheritance? Were they so consumed by greed that they could not even feign concern for their ailing mother? The isolation felt immense, a heavy, suffocating blanket. In a moment of deep despair, watching Emily's tired face as she dozed fitfully in the armchair she had pulled beside my bed, a terrible thought took root. Perhaps I should just give in. Perhaps I should tear up the current will, the one with Robert's and my carefully constructed clause, and just divide everything equally, regardless of their behavior, regardless of justice. What was money? What was even fairness compared to some semblance of peace, however hollow, however unjust? The thought of Emily, after I was gone, having to endure their continued animosity and ostracization because she had benefited from their disinheritance, was almost unbearable. Maybe peace, at any price, was the better option. For a few dark, fevered hours, I seriously considered capitulating to their demands. But as the fever slowly began to break and my strength gradually returned under Emily's devoted care, clarity began to reemerge from the fog of illness and despair. One afternoon, Emily, trying to cheer me, brought out an old leather-bound photo album, one filled with pictures from their childhoods, from happier times. We sat propped up in my bed, turning the thick pages together. There were snapshots of birthdays, of holidays at the lake, of school graduations, of silly faces and youthful exuberance. Then, we came across a particular photograph. It was Robert, taken about 30 years ago. He was beaming, his arms thrown wide, encompassing all three of our children, a young, grinning John, a shyly smiling Emily, and a pouting, pigtailed Lisa, all squeezed together on an old park bench. Robert was looking directly at the camera, his eyes so clear and kind, full of an immense, encompassing love and pride. Emily, her voice soft and a little wistful, touched the image of her father. "Dad loved us all so much, did he not, Mother?" she said quietly. "He never saw any difference between us. We were just his kids." I looked at Robert's smiling face, at the unadulterated love shining from his eyes, and it was as if he were right there in the room with us. The imagined disappointment I had felt from him regarding John and Lisa's behavior was still there, but now it was overlaid with a stronger, clearer message. His imagined encouragement to stand firm, to uphold the principles of fairness and true familial love that had been the bedrock of our lives together. The memory of our shared values, our deep commitment to ensuring all our children felt equally loved and secure, flooded back with renewed force. The insidious temptation to give in, to buy a false peace at the expense of justice and Emily's dignity, vanished as if it had never been. "You are absolutely right, Emily," I said, my voice, though still a little weak from the illness, regaining some of its former strength and conviction. "Your father would expect me to see this through. He would expect me to ensure that our family, what remains of it and what it stands for, is built on love and integrity, not on greed and prejudice. And I will not let him down. I will not let you down." In that moment, looking at Robert's beloved face and Emily's gentle, hopeful one, my resolve, which had wavered in the dark night of my soul, was not just restored. It was forged anew, tempered by illness and despair into something harder, more resilient. I decided then that the time for passive observation, for simply enduring their attacks, was over. It was time to prepare for the final act. They thought my illness had weakened me further, made me more pliable, more likely to surrender to their wishes. They had no idea it had only served to clarify my purpose, to steel my spine. The stage was set, and the final act was about to begin, orchestrated by a mother they had profoundly and foolishly underestimated. A few weeks later, when I was fully recovered and feeling my old strength return, I made a call to Mr. Thompson. I instructed him to schedule a meeting and to request the presence of all 3 of my children. My voice, when I then called John, Lisa, and Emily individually, was deliberately neutral, betraying none of the turmoil or the resolve that churned within me. "Mr. Thompson has requested a meeting with all of us at his office next Tuesday at 2:00, I informed each of them. "He wishes to discuss some family matters related to my estate planning. He stressed that it is important for all of you to be there." John and Lisa agreed readily, almost eagerly. I could hear the unspoken assumption in their voices. Finally, Mother was seeing sense. Her illness must have given her a scare, made her realize she needed to get her affairs in order according to their desires. Emily agreed too, though her assent was tinged with a familiar trepidation, a weariness of further conflict. The following Tuesday, we gathered in Mr. Thompson's formal, wood-paneled office. The air was thick with unspoken expectations and a palpable tension. John and Lisa sat upright on the leather chairs opposite Mr. Thompson's large desk, their expressions a mixture of feigned solemnity and ill-concealed expectancy. John even had his briefcase again, as if ready to produce new documents or take copious notes. Emily sat quietly beside me, her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze mostly on the floor. I felt a surge of protective love for her, and a deep, sorrowful anger towards my other 2 children. Mr. Thompson, ever the consummate professional, waited until we were all settled before he began. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his gaze sweeping over each of us in turn. "Martha has asked me to join her today to clarify certain long-standing provisions within her current last will and testament. Specifically, we will be reviewing a particular clause that was drafted and included in this document many years ago with the full knowledge, input, and agreement of both Martha and her late husband, Robert." John and Lisa exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. I could see the flicker of anticipation in their eyes. They likely thought this was the moment I would announce a revised will, one that favored them. Mr. Thompson picked up a document from his desk. It was my will. He opened it to a marked page. "I will read the relevant section aloud," he stated, his voice calm and deliberate, each word carrying weight. It reads as follows: "It is my deepest and most cherished wish that my children, all of them, live in harmony and treat each other with enduring fairness, profound respect, and unconditional love, irrespective of their origins or any other distinguishing factor. Therefore, should any beneficiary named in this will, in the period leading up to my passing, or indeed during the subsequent administration of my estate, be found by my executor to have engaged in malicious gossip, discriminatory actions or pronouncements, emotional cruelty, undue pressure, or attempts to improperly influence me or coerce other beneficiaries with the specific intent of diminishing another rightful heir's designated share or their inherent standing within our family, based upon prejudice regarding their birth, adoption, or any similar distinction, that beneficiary shall be deemed to have acted directly contrary to the core principles of this family and this testator's most express and heartfelt wishes." He paused, letting the words sink in. John shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Lisa's confident expression wavered slightly. Mr. Thompson continued, his voice even more measured. "Consequently," said beneficiary, "upon such a finding by my executor, shall forfeit their entire inheritance as stipulated within this will. Their forfeited share, in its entirety, shall then be redistributed equally among the remaining non-offending beneficiaries. If, however, all named beneficiaries are deemed by the executor to have engaged in such prohibitive behavior, or if there remains only one non-offending beneficiary, then the entirety of any and all forfeited shares, or indeed the entire estate as may be applicable, shall be directed, without reservation, to a charitable foundation, to be chosen by my executor, that is dedicated to supporting the welfare and future of adopted children and orphans." Absolute silence descended upon the room. It was a silence so profound, so heavy, it felt as if all the air had been sucked out. John's face, moments before, tinged with anticipation, had drained of all color, leaving it a sickly, waxy yellow. Lisa's jaw had literally dropped, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with stunned disbelief. What does that mean?" she finally stammered, her voice a hoarse whisper, barely audible. Mr. Thompson looked directly at John, then at Lisa, his expression grave, his gaze unwavering. "It means, John, and it means, Lisa," he said, his tone devoid of accusation, but heavy with implication, "that Martha, your mother, has kept meticulous and contemporaneous records of your various communications, your specific demands, your repeated pressure, and your actions and words towards both her and towards your sister, Emily, since the occasion of her 70th birthday. Your documented behavior, by any reasonable and objective interpretation, appears to fall squarely, and unfortunately, quite comprehensively, within the scope of the conduct described and proscribed by this very clause." John shot to his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the polished wood floor. "This is outrageous!" he yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of fury and panic. "You cannot do this! She is an old woman! Emily has clearly manipulated her. This is coercion!" Lisa, recovering her voice, chimed in, her tone shrill and laced with hysteria. "We are her blood, her biological children. This is our birthright. That clause is ridiculous. It is unfair. We will fight this in court. You cannot just disinherit us." Before Mr. Thompson could respond to their outburst, I spoke. My voice was quiet, yet it seemed to cut through their agitation, filling the room with an undeniable authority. This clause, John, Lisa, I said, looking at each of them in turn, my heart aching with a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless, was not written with either of you or any specific one of our children in mind when it was first conceived so many years ago. It was written by your father and by me. It was born from our deepest desire to protect the very idea of our family, to ensure that love, true love, and unwavering fairness would always be our guiding principles, our most important legacy. It was a testament to what we believed a family should be, what it must be, to endure. You were not targeted by this clause, my children. You have, through your own deliberate and sustained actions, chosen to activate it. You have spent these past many months demonstrating, with heartbreaking clarity, exactly the kind of behavior your father and I sought so earnestly to guard our family against. My words hung in the air, a quiet indictment of their greed and their cruelty. Mr. Thompson, with a calm that only highlighted their frantic distress, gestured to a neatly compiled folder on his desk. Martha's records are quite thorough, he stated quietly. They include dates, times, summaries of conversations, copies of messages, and witness accounts where applicable. For instance, the pressure to alter the will, the explicit demands for Emily to be excluded or her share reduced, the threats to withdraw contact with the grandchildren if your demands were not met, the disparaging remarks made about Emily's status as an adopted child, and the attempt to coerce Emily into signing away her legal rights with that family agreement document you presented. The evidence, I am afraid, is quite clear and compelling. He paused, then delivered the final, devastating blow. Under the unambiguous terms of this will, as it has stood unchanged for many years, it appears you have both, by your own hands, disinherited yourselves. John sank back into his chair, deflated, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Lisa just stared, tears of rage and frustration now streaming down her face. The fight seemed to drain out of them, replaced by the sickening realization of what they had done, the colossal miscalculation they had made. They looked at me, perhaps expecting, even at this late stage, a reprieve, a softening, a mother's forgiveness that would override the stark letter of the law. But my expression, though filled with a profound sadness for them, for the family we once were, remained firm. Emily, who had been watching this all unfold with a mixture of shock and sorrow, reached out and gently took my hand. There was no triumph in her eyes, no hint of vindication, only a deep, compassionate sadness for the path her siblings had chosen, and for the pain it had caused us all. Eventually, after a few more sputtering protests that died in the face of Mr. Thompson's implacable calm and the weight of the evidence, John and Lisa rose. Their shoulders slumped in defeat, their faces etched with a bitter resentment that was almost painful to witness. They left Mr. Thompson's office without another word, the heavy oak door closing behind them with a quiet, irrevocable finality. The silence they left behind was heavy, but it was also, strangely, lighter. The storm had finally broken. Mr. Thompson then explained to Emily and me that the will was indeed clear and legally sound. Unless John and Lisa could somehow prove that I was not of sound mind when the will was originally made and signed with Robert all those years ago, a virtually impossible task given his extensive records and my current, obvious lucidity, or that the clause itself was somehow illegal, which he assured us it was not. Their path to contest it was effectively blocked. The estate, Martha, he concluded gently, will pass in its entirety to Emily, as she is, without any doubt, the sole remaining non-offending beneficiary. Or, of course, you still retain the option, if you so choose during your lifetime, to direct portions to the charitable foundation mentioned in the clause, or any other charities of your choosing. Emily, her eyes brimming with tears, turned to me, her voice thick with emotion. "Mother," she whispered, I never wanted this. I never wanted their share, especially not like this, not out of spite or their loss." I pulled her into a tight hug, stroking her hair. "I know, my dearest Emily. I know you did not. This was never about punishment for its own sake, nor was it about enriching one child at the expense of others. It was about upholding what is right, what is decent, what your father and I believed in with all our hearts. What we do now with the assets your father and I worked so hard to build will also be guided by those same principles of love and fairness." In the weeks and months that followed that momentous meeting, a profound sense of sorrow for the choices John and Lisa had made continued to weigh on me. But it was a sorrow increasingly overlaid with a quiet, resolute peace. The constant emotional turmoil, the manipulative games, the agonizing pressure, all of it was gone. Justice, in the precise way Robert and I had envisioned it all those years ago as a safeguard for our family's integrity, had been served. My relationship with Emily, already strong, deepened into an even more profound bond of mutual love, trust, and unwavering respect. She was, and always had been, a daughter in every sense of the word. I thought long and hard about the disposition of the estate. While Emily would indeed be the primary heir, as per the will's now activated clause, I decided, with her full and heartfelt agreement, that a significant portion of what would have been John's and Lisa's shares would be placed into a carefully structured trust for my grandchildren. This trust would be managed by a neutral, professional trustee. Mr. Thompson's firm agreed to take on this role, and the funds would be designated specifically for their education, health care, and essential needs, ensuring that John and Lisa could not control or misdirect this provision for their children. Furthermore, a substantial portion was donated, in both Robert's name and mine, to a reputable national charitable foundation dedicated to supporting adopted children and orphans, the very cause named in our will. These actions felt right. They reaffirmed our lifelong values, provided for the innocent parties involved, my beloved grandchildren, and allowed Robert's and my legacy to do some good in the wider world. My life found a new, quieter rhythm. I was free from the constant undercurrent of strife, free from the expectation of a love that had proven conditional and grasping. I spent my days with Emily, enjoying simple pleasures, gardening, reading, long talks, and quiet companionship. I reconnected with old friends whom I had perhaps neglected during the height of the family turmoil. My home, once again, felt like a sanctuary. I did not know if I would ever truly reconcile with John and Lisa. The bridge between us was severely damaged, perhaps irreparably, by their actions, by the ugliness they had revealed. The stones of truth I had spoken on my 70th birthday had indeed been heavy, but the crushing weight of my children's subsequent greed and cruelty had been far heavier. Now, that burden was finally lifted. My family was different, yes, irrevocably changed, but what remained of it, the bond between Emily and me, was built on a foundation of authentic love, tested by fire and proven true. The most enduring lesson in all of this, the one I hold on to, is that true family is not, and never can be, defined solely by the circumstances of birth or the bonds of blood. It is forged in the crucible of shared experience, tempered by unwavering love, respect, and loyalty. Greed and prejudice are insidious poisons, destructive forces that can corrode and ultimately sever even the ties that seem closest, that seem unbreakable. But integrity and the courage to stand by one's deepest principles, even in the face of profound personal pain and familial betrayal, can ultimately lead to a hard-won peace, a deep sense of self-respect, and the quiet triumph of enduring love. Sometimes, the hardest, most painful lessons are the ones people end up teaching themselves through the stark consequences of their own choices. Thank you for walking this journey with me. It was not an easy story to tell, but one I felt needed to be shared. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel, liking this video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of the final outcome? We have many more stories to share, stories of life, love, and the complexities of family. And we would love for you to be a part of our growing community. We hope to see you again very soon.